Hey now, it's OmniDog with OmniDog's Vault. This week it is Root Beer Reviews, where I review comic books and have a root beer float. Today's root beer is Boylan. It's pretty good. I have found that Haagen-Dazs is my favorite ice cream, but it doesn't do well in root beer. It kind of crystallizes, and that Breyers is generally better. Maybe because it's got more emulsifiers or additives or gunk or something. But sit back and relax. Watch me have a root beer float and get it in my mustache. And I'll review books. I'm going to review two books. Brendan Donnelly, my friend, had an idea that I review a well-known book and a kind of under the radar book. And that's a good idea. And for that idea, I'm going to send the other great idea Brendan had was to marry his wife Emily, and she likes these Wonder Woman socks that I got in my Funko Pop box that I didn't particularly dig. So I will be sending these to Emily as a thank you to Brendan for this idea and as a way to stay in Emily's good graces. So first book we're going to review is the Under the Radar book. You may question whether it's under the radar. I don't. It got a lot of publicity when it first came out, but I don't know that it's generally embraced by the public. And that is the book Strange Fruit. J.G. Jones and Mark Waid both worked on the writing, and J.G. Jones did a remarkable job on the art. Now the name Strange Fruit, I believe, comes from the song Strange Fruit, which has a complicated history. It was written by a Jewish guy back in probably the 30s or 40s, maybe later. But it was recorded by a black female artist. And the strange fruit in the song is unfortunately the lynching, refers to the lynching of black men in the South hanging from the trees. And that is the strange fruit. Very powerful song, made popular or more popular by Billie Holiday back in the 50s, late 50s, I believe. But that's a tough subject to tackle. Strange fruit, race in comics. You don't really get that much talk in comics about race and racism, mostly because it's a white dominated field. You have mostly white superheroes sold to a mostly white audience of young white males. That's generally the issue. I think that there are minorities that are involved. There are minority creators and there are minority readers too, obviously. But I think the general population of the comic book world is white. So race is a very tricky subject. And in this book, the writers set out to talk about the flooding of Chatterley, Mississippi, the Great Flood of 1927. And the kind of twist in it is that while there is segregation and racism that is happening along with the flooding conditions, we see coming from the sky some kind of craft or meteor, and on it or in it is a black super being who does not speak and is naked throughout much of the book. Um, the book has fabulous art. I will give it credit for that. It's a cross between Norman Rockwell and Alex Ross. Here you can see the musculature of the unnamed creature who they end up calling Johnson because his Johnson's hanging out. But here's an example of the art, which is amazing. That's the good news about this book, is that it has amazing art, and it is gripping and compellingly realistic. This art is. That's, as I say, the good news. The bad news is, unfortunately, we have a couple of white guys writing about black history. And going into it, I thought, sure, why can't white guys write about racial history? Does it have to be exclusively something that only a black person can write about? It turns out, kind of, yeah. This book seemed to lack kind of, it felt kind of empty to me. Um, the It turns out the white men that wrote the book end up writing about white people. In this book, it's more about white people and how they handle the flooding and the relationship with black people in it, and the arrival of this gentleman called Johnson. He's here in a library trying to understand what's going on, absorbing all the information he can. He's naked and never speaks or wears a Confederate flag around his waist. Um, like right here. That's a pretty controversial image right there. He almost looks animalistic there, and it's I can see where it might be offensive to some people. Because the black people in this book generally don't say anything. They don't act. They don't do anything. They're more vessels for sort of maybe cliches and stereotypes. Um, and the white supremacists in this book are almost cartoony. They are so over the top that they're almost funny. And of course, there's nothing funny about white supremacists, but they're so cartoony that it's hard to relate to them as people. They appear to be caricatures. And the sheriff is a white person. He's almost a caricature. And it in it, there's always at the time and currently, you can say that there are pockets where not all white people are. You don't have an area where all the white people are prejudiced or the white people are not prejudiced. You generally get a mix, but I think that years and years ago, this is almost 100 years ago, this is 90 years ago, that I think that there were areas that were solidly racist. And in this book, there's always somebody saying something racist, including the N word, and then another white person saying something a little nicer, trying to smooth things out. And it's almost like, oh, white people aren't that bad. There's always some kind of redeeming quality to the racist remark. Somebody else will say something. And that doesn't really seem realistic to me from the time that the book was written in 1927. Um, there's no real protagonist that's fleshed out. There's kind of a senator in it that appears to be sort of the ideal good white savior. 1927, going to be hard to find a senator from the South that was not a segregationist, in my opinion. Now, Mark Waid is my favorite author. He wrote my favorite book ever, Irredeemable. He's written Kingdom Come. He did a great run on Daredevil. He's doing Black Widow now. But this book to me is a big, empty nothing. It did not need to be. I don't know the impetus behind this, but I really don't. Apart from the art, which is fantastic, this is a story that comes up really empty for me. I found it lacking in heart. I found it uh, sort of the introduction of this man from space seems really out of place and doesn't seem to really go anywhere. And I just think it's kind of a poorly thought out book that didn't get me anywhere. I didn't have a good feeling about it. It just felt sort of empty in a weird way, and it makes me feel bad because I love Mark Waid and J.G. Jones' artwork is fantastic. But I think this was bit of a misfire. Don't. It's not a book I recommend. I don't think that it's not an expensive book, but I think there's better books out there that you could spend your money on. So, Strange Fruit, I'm sorry, didn't dig it. So, I wouldn't recommend it to you. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. Here's a book that I will recommend to you because I loved it, and that is Mockingbird by Chelsea Kane. And I can't even pronounce the woman's last name, so I don't even know if I should try. Kate Nimchik. Nimchik. I'm sorry, Kate. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Rachel Rosenberg did the colors in it. And color's an important part in this book because the colors pop. Not only is this a well-told, really funny story, but it is really well drawn, and you can see how the colors in this scene, this is the Hellfire Club, where Mockingbird goes to rescue her fellow spy, Lance Hunter. This is written sort of in the vein of Fraction's Hawkeye, which is to say it's very funny, very dry wit, and it's also got a little bit of Pulp Fiction in it, the movie where it goes back and forth to tell its story. In the very beginning, we've got Kate, I'm sorry, I was going to say Kate. We've got Bobby Morse, who's Mockingbird. She's always having to go into SHIELD headquarters to get checkups and physicals. She's been injected with the super serum and also something called the Infinity Formula, and so they've always got to keep tabs on her. And in this scene, she bashes open the window behind her therapist, and she sees zombies. What the heck? What are these zombies? What are they? Well, we don't. That's in one of the first issues. Here we see another scene 1 month earlier. So it does that. It jumps back and forth. 1 month earlier, 5 days later, things like that. The zombies don't get resolved until issue 5, when she revisits. We see a continuation of that early time period. And if you like corgis, this is the book for you, because here she is seen with a corgi, and she asks the nurse, "Don't you even want to ask about the corgi?" And the nurse says no. And what is the corgi doing there? Well, the book backtracks at a later part and tells you about the corgi. There's even a hybrid mixture of corgi dolphins that save her in one issue, corgi fins or something. And this book has a lot of heart and is a lot of fun. Excuse me while I enjoy my root beer float. But one thing that I really liked about it is that not only is she a strong female protagonist, but I think that there are a lot of books out there. This was written by a woman, Chelsea Kane, who does a great job. I think there are a lot of books out there that are written where the female struggles with the life-work balance. And in this book, Bobby Morse seems to have it figured out. She's not really dealing with those issues. So it's an interesting take on it. She's got things figured out so that she can focus strictly on the action. And this is an action comic with a lot of funny references in it and a lot of humor. Here she is in the Hellfire Club again. The Hellfire Club plays a strong part in the first arc in it. The women are in charge in the Hellfire Club, and they are the strong, dominant ones, and the men are the one that are the kind of sexualized fetish objects, and the women take advantage of them in that manner, which is an interesting flip of how things can be. Then we get Bobby Morse I'm not going to give away too much here, but then we get Bobby Morse having to deal with a mutant whose powers come out, and the powers are leeching objects and people of their color. She can drain the color out of anybody, and she can also create kind of rainbow force fields. And Mockingbird has to go in, and the men haven't been able to figure out what to do with this girl. She's captured some of her friends in a rainbow bubble on top of a building, and it's told through jumps back and forth, but Bobby's able to figure out exactly what to do there, whereas the men are kind of fumbling the issue. I won't spoil it and say how she does it, but this book is a lot of fun and has great covers by Joelle Jones. This is the controversial cover that forced, I believe, Chelsea Kane off of Twitter at one point, which is ridiculous. This also, the second book, issue 8 is when it got canceled, unfortunately, because it's a great comic. And issue 8 is when it got canceled. This trade was already out, so they put out the second one with the next 3 stories. And there's a Civil War tie-in there, and then they had to fill it out with some earlier tales of Mockingbird from New Avengers. Those were interesting, but it's not a ripoff, because what they had to do was get the other 3 issues out and make it a full trade. So in this one, she's on a boat that's sort of a nerd convention, and it's a lot of fun. It's a Civil War tie-in, Civil War II tie-in, which I didn't read, but I was able to understand enough. So I highly recommend Mockingbird. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. This is definitely worth your dollars. If you like to laugh, if you like action comics, if you like a strong female protagonist, if you like comic books at all, you need to read Mockingbird, because it is great. I enjoyed the heck out of it, and that is really the important thing. If you want to enjoy a comic book, Mockingbird's for you. So I recommend highly that you go out, get your mitts on it, read it, enjoy it, and remember why comic books exist: to make our lives fun. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you have a root beer float with it. Or if you don't have one, I hope it gave you a craving to go out and get one, because root beer floats and comic books make the world a better place. And hopefully you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, leave a remark, tell me what you thought, and we'll catch you on the next video. Thanks for tuning in.